Welcome to Courageous Conversations with Heman, where we engage with leading thinkers and activists who are reshaping how we understand critical social issues. Today's conversation promises to be not only insightful but transformative. We are diving deep into a subject that is deeply embedded in the Indian social fabric as it is often rendered invisible. Caste. Our guest is a scholar whose groundbreaking research has illuminated the complexities of caste, gender, and nationalism. Our guest is none other than Dr. Panchali Ray. She is an assistant professor of anthropology and gender studies at Krea University. Her academic credentials are as impressive as her impact. Dr. Roy holds a PhD in gender studies from Jodhpur University and an MA in social work from Tata Institute of Social Sciences and a BA in history from Kolkata University. How real distinction lies in the depth and nuance with which he explores his marginalized communities and their struggles. Talking about her acclaimed book, Politics of Precarity, shines a light on caste-based labor discrimination, particularly in professions like nursing, that are shaped by a deeply entrenched hierarchies. Talking about her ongoing research on Cha communities in Bengal, which confronts the disturbing intersection of caste and nationalism. Dr. Roy's insight challenge us to rethink our understanding of community, identity, and the very fabric of society. In today's episode, we will unpack the invisibility of caste in Bengal. Are we witnessing historical disruptions or continuities? From the stabilization of labor to the implications of rising nationalism, we will dwell into pressing questions about caste and its role in shaping social dynamic. Dr. Panchali Roy, thank you very much for joining us today. Your expertise and passion for these topics are truly inspiring. How are you doing today?
Thank you. I'm doing well. Thank you, Heman, for inviting me to your podcast. I'm quite excited to speak to you about my previous research as well as my ongoing research. So, yes.
Let's dive into the pressing questions without any ado. Dr. Rai, you have conducted extensive research on caste dynamics, particularly within the marginalized communities. I would like to know what first inspired you to dwell into this complex subject, and why do you think that it is crucial to study caste in today's context?
Well, I come from Bengal and I've lived there. I lived in Calcutta most of my life, and my research was and it continues to be in Bengal. So I grew up with this understanding what scholars have called the Bengali exceptionalism, that caste does not exist in Bengal. And in fact, I feel that one of the reasons why people say that caste does not exist in Bengal is because of this complete invisibilization of Dalit communities in Bengal. In fact, the three dominant castes in Bengal, the Brahmins, the Kaistos, and the Boitos, are so dominant and so powerful, whether in terms of resources, whether in terms of access, social culture, the whole idea of a Bhadralok, which has taken on the public and the political sphere. That is what makes caste so invisible. It's not that it's not that caste does not exist, but the fact that anti-caste politics has got completely invisibilized in Bengal. And that's what, in many ways, intrigued me about researching caste in India. So, in historians have demonstrated that one of the ways that caste got rigidified was also because of labor, and how labor was divided into manual and menial labor and intellectual labor. And those who were associated with professions that were manual and menial in nature were also stigmatized, and it was considered polluting labor. And that became very central to understanding caste. So that's what led me to explore in my PhD and my book the how labor became central to understanding caste, and as a feminist, I was very deeply interested in the question of gender and how caste and gender came together, and how did it reflect in occupational mobility, in job segregation, and did really caste play a significant role in Bengal, in the labor market in Bengal? So yes, so my ethnographic study, so that's what I did for my PhD, and was an ethnographic study of the nursing profession. I explored how nurses, nursing attendants, ancillary workers, ayas, how caste had a significant role in making sure that certain women could rise at the top of the profession and certain could not. So that was where my interest lay, and that is what my work was in the early years of my career.
Dr. Rai, this is a fascinating overview of your journey and the frameworks you have used to study caste. Building on that, let's discuss your book, Politics of Precarity, where you examine the stigmatization of labor within the caste hierarchy. How does your work contribute to the existing literature on caste based labor discrimination, and what gaps does it address?
So there's been a lot of sociological interest in caste, right? And there has been incredible amounts of research on caste as constitutive of capitalism and the economic organization and how social capital circulates, etc. But I also feel that caste has been, in that sense, there's been a binary that has functioned in of tradition and modernity and economy and culture, and caste has in so many ways been relegated to the realm of culture. And therefore my book tried to understand that with liberalization, globalization, caste has not dissolved. It continues to remain. And one of the key elements or one of the key strategies of capitalism is to harness existing social inequalities, including caste. So my work in that sense directly contradicts a lot of economists who claim that with modernity, with liberalization, with privatization, social inequalities will dissolve and the labor market will function as an equalizer. So, which is not necessarily completely untrue. I mean, there has been various movements. It's where caste hierarchies have dissolved. But my book looks at how gender and caste continue to operate in an occupation like nursing. So nursing is, in that sense, makes for a very interesting area of investigation, because you will probably know that for women trained in nursing, it is an opportunity for great social and economic mobility, given the international chain of reproductive labor, given immigration, etc. But the peculiarity of nursing is that it continues to be a stigmatized profession. It is because of its association with polluting labor, because nursing is corporeal labor. It deals with bodily detritus, bodily fluids. So it's kind of caught in that, in that contradiction of being a hypermobile profession as well as a deeply stigmatized profession. So I thought that would make for a very interesting case study to understand how caste operationalizes along with gender in a profession that's caught in the vortex of two very contradictory poles. And my research, in fact, I did not anticipate the findings of my research, was where it showed that in Bengal, the caste divisions are rather stark. So most trained nurses who are at the top of the hierarchy are from the three dominant castes of Brahmins and Kaisthas and Boitos. Whereas most of the nursing aides, ancillary workers, maternity ward assistants were all from Dalit Bahujan communities. So, and what I found interesting is that a lot of these occupational hierarchies drew its justification from the cultural attributes of caste. So how was skill perceived in the nursing hospitals and the nursing homes? And the perception of the skill far exceeded the medical definition. So many times and often I would come to understand, I would meet with a response that only certain kind of women can do nursing, and those are the women who come from middle class, upper caste families, because they have the temperament to be a caregiver. Nursing cannot be done by women who come from low caste families, because they are, because of their caste attributes, they are unable to give the kind of care that is required for healing. So it was very deeply tied to the idea of respectability, and going back to what I initially said about how the category of bhodro, or respectable, invisibilized caste, and how respectable femininity was deeply tied with the question of honor, with the question of body, with the question of caste. So that's what my research was focused on, in understanding how an incredibly modern, technology-driven profession was also internally riddled by caste differentiation and hierarchies.
Oh, that's interesting or compelling insights on the caste hierarchy. And this brings me to your research on Char communities in Bengal. Uh, as you have explored the both historical and contemporary caste dynamic within these communities, can you discuss how historical caste practices in these areas have evolved and how they reflected in the current socio-political conditions?
Yes, so this is my ongoing research, and it's an ongoing ethnographic study. So these are just some preliminary observations that I have. And uh, the chore that I work on are also in Murshidabad district, are also borderlands. They're right on the India-Bangladesh border. And to understand the caste inequality, or to understand the caste dynamics of the contemporary, one needs to go back to the partition, because that remains and is in many ways stoked, and is one of the festering wounds that continue to haunt these communities, both Muslim and Dalit communities in Bengal borderlands and the riverine lands that I'm working on. And I think the one important thing that a lot of historians and people working on, scholars working on partition have pointed out, that in Bengal, the partition literally broke the back of anti-caste movements, like very powerful movements like the Matuam community, the Namasudra, the Rajbongshi movements. Of course, each one had its own context, but what the partition did is it broke the back of these movements. In fact, unlike in Western India, the partition in Eastern India was not an overnight phenomena. You would know that these were gradual. It happened in waves, and the experience or the afterlife of partition for, say, the Bengali Bhadralok and the Dalit communities were completely and starkly different. Whether it was the question of dispossession, dislocation, migration, resettlement, the experience of the state itself, rehabilitation, and this vast and very rich literature on it, and how Dalit communities were in many ways literally abandoned by the state. So I think when I work in these areas, in these borderland communities, in the chores, it is this experience of the partition that comes up again and again like a festering wound. So the chores are an ecologically fragile zone. So in many ways, one cannot survive there without collaboration. And in many ways, Dalit and Muslims collaboration or solidarity has existed in many ways, because these chore regions are also where the poorest and the most marginalized people live. So when the partition happened, a lot of Namasudras particularly moved from East Bengal or East Pakistan, exchanged land with Indian Muslims and came and lived in the Chaur communities, which was anyway a predominantly Muslim area. So what happened, I kind of get a story of what happens is you're immediately put into conflict with Muslim communities over access and control over resources, scarce resources. And so the relationship between the Dalits and the Muslims on these riverine lands and Bengal borderlands are informed both by competition as well as collaboration. So it's not really either this or that. So it's in many ways, it is contingent, it is also opportunistic. So I feel that to understand the caste dynamics in the Chor regions of Bengal borderlands, one needs to also understand what wounds fester and how do certain forces mobilize these wounds to kind of break the Dalit Muslim alliances that could have possibly built in these areas.
When talking about the caste hierarchies, I cannot stop myself talking about the impact of nationalism on caste structure and why it is significant, specifically with the rise of national wing populism. Uh, how have you observed changes in caste-based social structure within these Char communities in recent years? And what theoretical implications do these changes have for our broader understanding of caste in a nationalist context?
Yeah. So, democracy in many ways claims that it does away with social identities, that it is a citizen votes, and that citizen is an unmarked human, unmarked by caste, unmarked by gender. And in fact, I think the Indian politics, and particularly with 1990, the Mandal Commission, implementation of the Mandal Commission report with introduction of reservations for OBC, kind of broke that myth or showed us the limit of humanism in terms of understanding in liberal theory. So the fact that, and these are very established political theory, that India votes by caste, India votes by community, etc. And I think that is an important question to remember when we try to understand the rise of a certain political force, of a right-wing political force in our country, and what is the impact of it in borderlands? What is the impact of it on shorelands, where communities continue to live cheek by jowl in collaboration and in contest? So I think for me, again, I go back to the afterlife of partition to understand this. And one of the things that I realized in when I was doing my ethnographic study was how Hindu nationalist forces would mobilize using, say, social work as a method to kind of bring about a certain cohesion and solidarity, or to bring about a certain to mobilize. So, for instance, the RSS in our country is a completely Brahminical organization. So, how would an organization like that have entry into Dalit communities? Why would they be accepted? And the two things that I noticed in my research in the Chor communities was one was the question of natural disasters. So every time there was an erosion, every time there was any kind of ecological catastrophe, organizations funded by the Hindu nationalists would come to help people, to say that we stand by you, we are Hindus, we are together on this. The other thing was, of course, the question of coming together against a natural enemy, the Muslim. And that I particularly saw, which is now, if you know, in India is becoming a very contested term, the question of love jihad, where interfaith couples are being targeted, where it's particularly if it's a Hindu woman and a Muslim man. And I, in my research there, I realized that this became a point of entry for right-wing organizations, and particularly for Vishwa Hindu Parishad, to enter into the lives of Dalit communities, saying that we are here to help you protect your women. So the question of honor, the question of cow in terms of cow smuggling continues to be very emotive issues that try to build a cohesive Hindu society. So for RSS or for Vishwa Hindu Parishad, then to build a unified idea of a unified Hindu society is then to identify a common other and a common Muslim community. And that is what I see in these shorelines itself, that one is to continuously fetishize the wound of the partition, where you've been abandoned by the state, you've been abandoned by your Muslim neighbors in East Pakistan, and you had to come here with nothing. And the other is, of course, that you continue to be under attack by a common enemy. So these are how a certain right-wing mobilization is taking place in the communities of Chors in Bengal borderlands. And the question of solidarity is what I have been contemplating about quite a bit, that there is no pre-given collective out there. So when one brings in the question of solidarity, or solidarity is what makes a community come together. And that's when I also see a contradiction, because one, you need solidarity with your neighbor to live in an ecologically fragile zone, and the other is the solidarity that that right-wing organizations hold out to you, that we are in solidarity with you against against a common enemy. And I feel that these contesting solidarities, actually studying them is also in a way, or has the potential to open up and to think through the questions of how right-wing mobilization can happen or not happen. What I think understanding these solidarities in its both in terms of its success and in terms of its failure is a way also to understand what influence do right-wing politics have on the ground, and how successful are they.
I totally agree with you, Dr. Roy, on this. Your findings on Char communities and other marginalized communities are thought-provoking. This leads me to another critical discussion that has gained a momentum in India post the ongoing debate about the caste census. How do you view the significance of caste census in addressing caste-based disparities? And what methodologies or theoretical challenges does it present?
It is a very controversial topic, and there are a lot of discussions to it, but I think my stand is very clear. I think the caste census is essential, and it is a very essential, a very necessary precondition for an anti-caste politics. It's not the only precondition, but it is a necessary precondition. And I think one of the ways that dominant castes, Brahmanical castes, have a hold over public resources, over the public imagination, or the political imagination, is the idea of castelessness, or a life that is unmarked by caste, which we know is not true. And I think a caste census would also give us a sense of the question of population and the question of representation, something probably those who want to believe in a unified Hinduism, want to believe in a Hinduism that has no internal contradiction, would not welcome. In fact, scholars have said that a lot of right-wing mobilization, particularly in northern India, was a backlash to a rising anti-caste politics. And it is interesting that we've never really had a very deep demand for a caste census. And I mean, it's always been very limited. And I believe that unless the caste census is conducted, there can be that it becomes an important tool to mobilize. It also becomes an important tool to politicize the unequal distributions, the hierarchies, and the inequalities that exist in our society. So I can understand why people don't want it, but I can also clearly say that without a caste census, we cannot really fight caste injustice. The invisibility of caste continues if we do not have a caste census. And particularly coming from Bengal, I feel a caste census would go a long way in trying to politicize the public space, try to politicize the social and the political space.
Not conducting caste census, this is the powerful tool of politicizing it. As we wrap up this enlightening conversation, I want to extend my heartfelt gratitude to Dr. Panchali Ray for sharing her invaluable insights with us today. We have explored the we have explored the nuances of caste in Bengal, the profound impact of nationalism, and the pressing need for caste census to address this long-standing disparities. And to our listeners, thank you for joining in to the courageous conversations with me. If you want to dwell deeper into Dr. Roy's work or continue exploring these topics like Chama, be sure to check out her publication in our YouTube channel. Until next time, let's continue to seek understanding and amplify the voices of those who are often unheard. Thank you, Dr. Roy.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and I had a great time talking to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.